When Mia invited me and Sophie over for a sleepover at her family's cabin, I thought it'd be a fun change of pace. The cabin was nestled deep in the woods, miles from town, and her parents weren't home. They trusted Mia to be responsible since we were all 17. It was supposed to be a quiet night, movies, snacks, and maybe a scary story or two to fit the atmosphere. But by the end of the night, it didn't feel like a sleepover. It felt like survival. We arrived just before sunset. The cabin was cozy but isolated, surrounded by towering trees and silence, except for the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. Mia showed us around, pointing out the generator in case the power went out, and warning us not to go too far into the woods. "Why?" Sophie asked, half laughing. "Because it's easy to get lost," Mia said, dead serious. "There's nothing but forest for miles. And there've been rumors." "What kind of rumors?" I asked. Mia hesitated, then shrugged it off. "Just stuff about weird people living out here. Probably nonsense." That should have been our first red flag. After dark, we settled in the living room, the glow of the TV illuminating the cabin. We were halfway through a cheesy horror movie when Sophie paused it. "Did you hear that?" she asked. We listened. At first, I didn't hear anything. Then it came, a faint crunching sound, like footsteps on gravel. It was coming from outside. "It's probably an animal," Mia said, but her voice was tense. We tried to get back into the movie, but the sound came again, closer this time. Sophie got up and peeked out the window, her face inches from the glass. "There's someone out there," she whispered. Mia and I joined her, crouching to avoid being seen. At first, I didn't see anything, just the dark shapes of trees. Then a figure stepped into the faint light from the cabin. A man, tall and lanky, wearing a hoodie with the hood pulled up. He wasn't moving, just standing there, staring at the cabin. "What the hell is he doing?" Sophie whispered. "I don't know," Mia said. She reached for her phone, but her hand was shaking so badly she dropped it. The sound must have alerted him, because he suddenly moved, stepping closer to the cabin. "Lock the doors," I said, my voice barely steady. We scrambled to make sure every window and door was locked, double-checking everything. The man circled the cabin, his footsteps crunching through the gravel. He didn't knock or try the doors. He just walked around, slow and deliberate, like he was sizing the place up. "Should we call the police?" Sophie asked, her voice trembling. "We don't have a signal out here," Mia said. "The generator." I remembered Mia's tour of the cabin, and how the generator was outside, in a shed about 20 feet from the house. "What if he tries to cut the power?" I asked. As if on cue, the lights flickered. Mia grabbed a flashlight. "We need to scare him off before he does anything else." Sophie and I stared at her like she was crazy, but Mia was already heading for the kitchen. She grabbed a heavy skillet and handed me a large knife. Sophie armed herself with a fire poker. We turned off the lights and crouched by the living room window, watching as the man walked toward the shed. He had a flashlight of his own now, its beam bobbing as he moved. "This is insane," Sophie whispered. But Mia had already unlatched the back door, motioning for us to follow her. We crept through the dark yard, using the shadows to stay hidden. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might give us away. The man was crouched by the generator, fiddling with something. Mia raised the skillet, ready to charge, but before she could, Sophie let out a gasp. He turned toward us, his flashlight beam sweeping across the yard. "Run!" Mia yelled. We bolted back to the cabin, slamming the door behind us and locking it. The man sprinted after us, pounding on the door so hard I thought it might break. "Leave us alone," Mia screamed. He didn't respond, just kept slamming into the door, harder and harder. And then, just as suddenly as it started, the pounding stopped. We stayed frozen, listening. Minutes passed in silence. "He's gone," Sophie whispered. I wasn't so sure. We decided to stay awake the rest of the night, huddled in the living room with our weapons close by. Every creak of the cabin made me jump, and I kept glancing at the windows, half expecting to see him staring back. Just before dawn, we heard it again. Footsteps on the porch. This time, they weren't slow or deliberate. They were running, circling the cabin over and over, faster and faster, until it felt like the whole house was vibrating. We screamed, but no one could hear us. And then the footsteps stopped. When the sun rose, we finally worked up the courage to go outside. There were muddy footprints all around the cabin, but no sign of the man. We packed up and left that morning, driving straight back to town without looking back. Mia's parents called the police, but they didn't find anything. Just the footprints. A week later, Mia texted me. They found the shed lock broken. There was a knife under the generator. Whoever he wasn't just trying to scare us. I still have nightmares about that night. About the man in the woods. And I'll never, ever go back to that cabin. It started as an ordinary Friday night. My parents were in their room, winding down after dinner, and I was sprawled on the living room floor with my best friend, Liam. We'd been planning this sleepover for weeks, excited for a night of video games and midnight snacks. My younger sister, Emma, had been sent to bed an hour ago, leaving the house calm and quiet except for the muffled sound of the TV. Around 10 p.m., my mom poked her head out of the bedroom. "Don't stay up too late," she said, giving us a mock stern look. My dad chimed in from behind her, "And don't eat all the chips. Save some for me." Liam and I laughed and promised to behave. The door clicked shut behind them, and we settled back into our game. The hours slipped by in a haze of laughter and trash talk until the clock on the wall ticked past midnight. That's when the first strange thing happened. I heard footsteps upstairs. At first, I thought it was Emma getting up to use the bathroom, but the footsteps were too heavy, deliberate. They moved from her room to the hallway, stopping right above us. Liam must have noticed my expression because he paused the game and asked, "You okay?" "Yeah," I said, trying to sound casual. "It's probably my dad." But deep down, I knew it wasn't. My dad had been in bed for hours, and he wasn't the type to wander the house at night. The footsteps started again, heading toward the staircase. Liam and I exchanged uneasy glances as the creaking grew louder, closer. "Maybe we should check it out," Liam whispered. I nodded, grabbing my phone for a flashlight. We crept toward the stairs, the glow of our phones barely piercing the darkness. "Dad!" I called out softly. No answer. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment, everything was still. Then, from the top of the stairs, we heard a faint, rhythmic tapping. It sounded like fingers drumming against the banister. "Hello?" Liam called, his voice shaking. The tapping stopped. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear anything else. Slowly, I aimed my flashlight up the stairs. The beam caught something, a shadow, darting out of view. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice cracking. Still no answer. Behind us, the bedroom door creaked open, and my mom stepped out, squinting in the dim light. "What are you two doing?" she asked, her voice groggy. "There's someone upstairs," I said quickly. My mom frowned, clearly thinking it was some prank. "It's probably Emma sleepwalking again," she said, stepping past us toward the stairs. My mom was brave like that, never afraid to check things out herself. "But Emma," I started, then stopped. Emma's door was closed, and the hallway was silent again. Mom didn't wait for an argument. She headed up the stairs, her steps confident. Liam and I followed hesitantly. When we reached the top, the hallway was empty. My mom peeked into Emma's room. She was sound asleep, her small figure curled up under the blankets. "See," Mom whispered. "Nothing to worry about." We checked every room upstairs, but everything was in its place. No open windows, no signs of anyone else in the house. Reluctantly, my mom went back to bed, telling us to get some sleep. But Liam and I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. Back in the living room, we sat in silence, listening for any sound. Just as I was starting to convince myself it had been my imagination, the TV turned on by itself. The screen was static, the kind of white noise you only see when there's no signal. Liam grabbed the remote and tried to turn it off, but it wouldn't respond. The volume started to climb, the static growing louder and louder until it filled the room. Then it stopped. The TV went black, and the house was silent again. "Dude," Liam whispered, his face pale. "What the hell is going on?" I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that tonight wasn't going to end the way we thought it would. A sudden sound made us both jump. A faint thud, followed by the unmistakable creak of an upstairs window opening. I froze, my mind racing. The windows had been closed when we checked. "No way," Liam breathed, his voice barely audible. We grabbed our flashlights and bolted up the stairs, our fear overtaking any sense of caution. The air was colder when we reached the hallway. The window at the end was wide open, curtains swaying in the breeze. I rushed to the window and looked out, but the ground below was empty, no sign of anyone. Who opened it?" I stammered. Liam pointed at the latch. It was unbroken, perfectly intact. Whoever had been there had opened it from the inside. "We need to tell your parents," Liam said, his voice shaking. I nodded, backing away from the window. We turned to head downstairs when something caught my eye. A muddy footprint, faint but unmistakable, leading away from Emma's door. My stomach dropped. We followed the prints cautiously, but they ended abruptly in the middle of the hall, as if whoever had been there had vanished into thin air. Liam and I exchanged a look of pure terror. This wasn't just our imagination. Back in the living room, I woke my mom and dad, barely able to get the words out. They checked the house again, finding nothing. My dad even went outside, scanning the yard with a flashlight, but there was no one there. The open window was written off as a draft, the footprints as dirt tracked in earlier. But Liam and I knew better. Someone had been in the house, and they were gone now. Or worse, they were still there, watching. It was meant to be just another sleepover at Caleb's place. His parents were away for the weekend, so we had the property to ourselves. A creaky old house on the outskirts of town, surrounded by trees and solitude. There were no neighbors around, no lighting, and nothing but darkness as the sun went down. We spent the most of the evening gaming, shoving chips into our mouths, and laughing over the strange noises his house produced. The floorboards creaked, and the wind howled through the trees outside. It was simply an old house doing old things. That's what I thought at first. However, things became peculiar about midnight. We were in the middle of a game when we noticed a faint tapping sound coming from behind the house. Caleb hesitated, his character frozen in mid-action on screen. "You hear that?" he inquired, his voice tense. I nodded. We stayed quiet, waiting. The tapping continued, this time louder, like knuckles rapping against glass. It was coming from the back door. Caleb grabbed a flashlight, and we moved towards the kitchen. The tapping ceased as we approached, but the hair on the back of my neck stood on edge. Caleb paused for a second before pulling the curtain that covered the glass door aside. The flashlight's beam did not illuminate anything, only the empty porch and the swaying trees beyond. Caleb murmured, probably just the wind, but still locked the door. We returned to the living room, attempting to brush it off. But I couldn't shake the sense that something was wrong, as if the home was holding its breath. About 15 minutes later, there was another noise. Not tapping this time. Knocking. 3 knocks, each hard and intentional. We both froze. Caleb's face became pale. We slowly turned to look down the hallway that leads to the kitchen. "I locked it," Caleb muttered. "Are you sure?" I responded, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded. We went toward the kitchen, each creak of the floorboards sounding unnaturally loud. The door was still locked, and the curtain was still drawn. But as we stood there watching, something crashed into the door, rattling the frame. We both jumped backward. Caleb shone the flashlight through the curtain, his hand trembling. The laser caught the edge of something human-shaped, but it vanished into the darkness before we could see anything else. Caleb cursed beneath his breath. "We need to call someone." He grabbed his phone, but there was no reception out here. He paced, muttering about the phone in the kitchen, but neither of us wanted to return there. Then we heard glass shattering. My stomach dropped. It came from the window over the sink in the kitchen. I grabbed a large candlestick, and Caleb took a fire poker from the fireplace. We approached the sound with caution. There were glass fragments all over the counter from the damaged window. The room was empty, yet the curtains swayed in the wind. Caleb said, "Check the rest of the house." We parted ways, moving as fast as we could via the downstairs. Nothing. However, when we reconnected in the hallway, we heard heavy, slow steps coming from upstairs, as if someone was purposefully putting weight into each step. Wide-eyed, we gazed at one another. I swallowed hard, my mouth as dry as sandpaper, as Caleb tightened his hold on the poker. Trying to keep quiet, we slipped up the stairs. As we arrived at the landing, the footsteps ceased, and the quiet was more eerie than the sound. The door to Caleb's bedroom was open, allowing light from the hallway to flood the room. With our homemade weapons aloft, we entered the chamber. It was deserted. We looked under the bed, in the closets, and even through the attic hatch. Nothing. However, I spotted something frightening as we turned to go. They unlocked the window. Caleb muttered, "I locked that earlier." The bedroom door banged behind us before I could reply. I thought my ears would explode from the volume. Caleb sprinted toward the door, but it remained in place. From the outside, the lock had been twisted. Caleb banged on the wood and screamed, "Who's there?" Then we heard the same purposeful knocking once more. It came from within the closet this time, though. We stopped. In the faint light, something metallic glinted as the door creaked open an inch. A tall, filthy man with a knife came out. His features contorted into a crooked smile as his eyes met ours. I didn't consider. I snatched Caleb's light from his bedside table and threw it at him. He stumbled as the light bulb cracked against his shoulder, and we seized the opportunity to run. We sprinted down the stairs, skipping steps and almost tripping over one another, after Caleb pulled the door open. Until we were outdoors, running across the backyard and into the woods. We didn't stop. Eventually, we found a house down the road with the lights on. The owners let us in and called the police. When the cops searched Caleb's house, they found signs of someone living in the basement. Food wrappers, dirty blankets, and a notebook filled with unsettling, rambling notes. The man was gone, but he'd left a message scratched into the wall of Caleb's room. It said, "You were fun to watch.